I want to explain something that happens inside your gut in the first 4 minutes after you eat a small snack. Not a big meal. A small one. A handful of almonds. Half an apple. A slice of cheese. Something healthy. Something you were told was a good choice. And yet, within minutes, your stomach starts to swell. It gurgles. It groans. Something down there tightens like a balloon being pumped up from the inside. And by the time evening comes, you feel full, heavy, and uncomfortable, even though you barely ate anything all day. I am not going to give you a list of 10 foods to avoid. You have probably already seen that video. You have probably already tried cutting out beans, or dairy, or bread, and the bloating still came back anyway, because it was never really about the food. I want to walk you through one single mechanism. One switch inside your digestive system that either turns on, or gets shut off, depending on something most people do without ever thinking about it. Once you see this mechanism clearly, the bloating stops feeling like a mystery, and starts feeling like something you can actually work with. Before we go further, tell me something in the comments. Just your first name, your age, and the city or town you're writing from. I like to know who is actually sitting with me through this, because a lot of people watching this are dealing with the exact same tight, swollen, uncomfortable feeling after eating, and it helps to know you're not the only one going through it. So let's talk about what is actually happening inside your small intestine, and why a small, perfectly healthy snack can trigger so much gas and gurgling. Here is the part almost nobody explains clearly. Your digestive system does not only work when you're eating. It has an entire second job, one that only switches on when your stomach is empty. Somewhere between 90 minutes and 2 hours after your last bite of food, once your gut senses there is nothing left to digest, a wave of powerful, coordinated muscle contractions begins at the top of your small intestine. This wave is slow, but it is strong. It rolls all the way down through 18 to 20 feet of intestine, sweeping everything in front of it, like a night shift cleaning crew moving room to room through a building after the last customer has gone home. Doctors call this the migrating motor complex. I'm going to just call it the sweeper wave, because that's exactly what it is. The sweeper wave has one job: clear out. It pushes forward any leftover food debris, dead cells lining the gut wall, and bacteria that have drifted up from where they belong, back down toward the large intestine where they should be. Think of it like a night janitor who waits until the restaurant closes, then walks through every single room, pushing all the crumbs and stray bits toward the exit doors. This only happens when the restaurant is closed. If people keep wandering back in for a snack, the janitor has to stop mid-sweep, put down the broom, and start over from the beginning once everyone leaves again. And that is exactly what happens in your gut every single time you eat something between meals, even something small, even something healthy. Here's the part that matters most for you, sitting there wondering why a handful of almonds set off a wave of gas. The moment any food, even a tiny amount, even just a sugary coffee or a piece of fruit, lands in your stomach, your body senses it. It releases hormones, mainly one called motilin, that tell the sweeper wave to stop immediately. Not slow down. Stop. Your gut switches back into digest mode, and the cleaning cycle resets completely back to zero. So if you eat breakfast, then have a small snack 90 minutes later, right as the sweeper wave was about to begin, you have just cancelled the cleanup before it even started. You do this again with an afternoon snack, and again with an evening handful of nuts while watching television, and by the end of the day, that sweeper wave may have never completed a single full pass through your intestine. What happens to all the debris the sweeper wave was supposed to clear out? It stays where it is. Undigested fragments of food sit in the small intestine longer than they were ever meant to. Bacteria that should have been pushed back down toward the large intestine instead linger higher up, closer to where they can interact directly with the food you're eating. And bacteria, given time and leftover food, do exactly what bacteria do. They ferment it. Fermentation produces gas. That gas has nowhere immediate to go, so it stretches the wall of your intestine from the inside, and that stretching is what you feel as bloating, and what you hear as that loud, echoing gurgle. This is the piece I really want you to sit with for a moment. You are not broken. Your digestive system has not suddenly become weak or sensitive with age. What has happened is entirely mechanical, entirely logical. You have, completely unknowingly, been running your gut like a kitchen that never fully closes. And a kitchen that never closes never gets properly cleaned. It's not the almonds. It's not the apple. It's the timing. There's a second layer to this that almost nobody talks about, and it becomes more important the older you get. It's the idea of bioavailability, or in simpler terms, whether your body can actually use what you're feeding it, versus whether it just sits there. As we age, several things naturally slow down. Stomach acid production tends to decline, meaning food particles that should be broken down into small manageable pieces instead arrive in the small intestine larger and less digested than they used to. The muscles that generate the sweeper wave itself also weaken somewhat with age, meaning even when it does fire, it may be a little less forceful, a little less thorough than it was in your 30s or 40s. So you have two things working against you at once. A cleaning crew that is naturally a bit less powerful than it used to be, combined with a schedule that keeps getting interrupted before the crew can even get started. Think of it like a garden hose that has a slow drip instead of a strong flush. If you let that hose run uninterrupted for its full cycle, it clears the line completely. But if someone keeps turning the tap on and off every few minutes, water just sits stagnant in different sections of the hose, and anything that was building up inside stays put. Your small intestine works almost exactly like that hose. It needs a full, uninterrupted cycle, once every 90 minutes to 2 hours of true fasting, to actually flush itself clean. Constant grazing is the equivalent of turning that tap on and off all day long, and never once letting the hose complete a full flush. There's one more piece of biology worth understanding here, because it explains why this feels so unpredictable from one day to the next. The switch between fed mode and fasted mode in your gut isn't controlled by willpower or awareness. It's controlled largely by your vagus nerve, the same long nerve that runs from your brainstem down through your chest and into your abdomen, coordinating a huge amount of what your organs do without you ever thinking about it. When food arrives, the vagus nerve helps trigger digestive enzyme release, slows the sweeper wave, and shifts blood flow toward your stomach and intestines to prioritize digestion. This is a sensible system when you eat 2 or 3 times a day. But when you're grazing constantly, this nerve is essentially being pinged all day long, fed signal, fed signal, fed signal, and it never gets the quiet stretch it needs to flip back over into cleanup mode. This is also part of why stress can make bloating worse independent of food choices, since the vagus nerve is highly sensitive to your nervous system's overall state, and chronic stress can suppress its normal fasting phase activity even when your eating pattern is otherwise reasonable. It's also worth understanding why this tends to become more noticeable specifically in your 50s, 60s, and beyond, rather than something you necessarily struggled with at 25. Younger digestive systems tend to have a wider margin of error. A stronger sweeper wave, more robust stomach acid, and faster overall gut transit mean that even fairly frequent snacking doesn't always produce noticeable symptoms. As those margins gradually narrow with age, the same snacking pattern that caused no issues decades ago starts producing real, noticeable bloating, not because your body has become fragile, but because the buffer that used to absorb the disruption has simply gotten thinner. If you're still with me, and this is starting to make sense of why your bloating feels almost random, some days better, some days worse, type the number 2 in the comments. I want to know how many of you are realizing this might be about timing rather than about which specific food is the culprit. So now let's go through this properly. I want to walk you through the most common eating patterns that interfere with your sweeper wave, ranked from the ones that do the most damage to your gut's cleaning cycle, down to the ones that barely interrupt it at all. This way, instead of guessing, you'll know exactly where your own habits fall on this scale. At the very worst end of this scale is what I call constant sipping. This is drinking anything other than plain water throughout the day, in small amounts, over and over. A sweetened coffee at 9. A splash of juice at 10:30. A protein shake at noon. An herbal tea with a spoon of honey at 2. Every single one of these, even though none of them feel like a meal, contains enough sugar or protein to trigger motilin release and shut the sweeper wave down. The stomach doesn't distinguish between a full plate of food and a small sweetened drink. Calories are calories, as far as that shutdown signal is concerned. If you're someone who sips something throughout the entire day, your sweeper wave may genuinely never complete a full cycle, morning to night. This is the single most damaging habit on this list, specifically because it feels harmless. Nobody thinks of a small oat milk latte as eating, but your intestine absolutely does. Second on this list is frequent small snacking, meaning eating something solid, even a small amount, every 2 to 3 hours. Nuts, crackers, cheese, fruit, protein bars. Again, it isn't the food itself that's the problem. Nuts are nutritious. Fruit is healthy. The problem is exclusively the frequency. Each time you eat, even a small handful, you reset the 90-minute countdown to 0. If you snack every 2 hours from 8 in the morning until 9 at night, you have given your gut 13 separate opportunities to cancel its cleaning cycle, and functionally 0 opportunities to complete one. Third is what I'd call the healthy grazer pattern, which is actually a slight variation of the second one, but worth calling out separately because so many health-conscious people fall into it without realizing. This is the habit of eating 5 or 6 small, balanced mini-meals a day instead of 2 or 3 full ones, a strategy that was popular for years under the idea that it keeps metabolism revving. The intention is good. The blood sugar stability can even be real. But from a gut motility standpoint, this pattern is nearly as disruptive as random snacking, because it still keeps the digestive system in a near-constant fed state, rarely allowing the true fasting window the sweeper wave requires. Fourth is late-night eating, specifically eating anything within 2 to 3 hours of going to sleep. This one is sneaky because it doesn't just interrupt one sweeper cycle, it interrupts the cycles that would otherwise run uninterrupted for the longest, most powerful stretch of time, which is overnight while you're asleep and not distracted by anything else. A late-night snack, even something as innocent as a small bowl of cereal or a few crackers, can prevent your gut from completing its single longest and most thorough cleaning pass of the entire 24-hour day. Fifth is chewing gum between meals. This surprises people every time. Chewing gum, even sugar-free gum, tricks your stomach into believing food is coming, which triggers a small release of digestive signals, even though nothing solid ever arrives. Done occasionally, it's not a major issue. Done as an all-day habit, especially for people trying to manage appetite or quit smoking, it can quietly suppress the sweeper wave the exact same way food does. Sixth is drinking large volumes of plain water with meals, or fizzy sparkling water frequently through the day. This one is more moderate. Plain still water doesn't trigger motilin release the way sugar or protein does, so hydration itself is not the enemy here. But carbonated drinks introduce gas directly into a gut that may already be dealing with fermentation gas from delayed food, and the combination is what often produces that especially uncomfortable, tight, about to pop feeling rather than a mild, ordinary bloat. Seventh, milder still, is eating 3 full meals a day with no snacking, but eating them relatively close together, for example breakfast at 7, lunch at 11:30, and dinner at 5. Because the gaps are shorter than 4 hours, the sweeper wave technically gets interrupted before completing a full pass most of the time, but because there's no random snacking layered on top, the disruption is mild and inconsistent rather than constant. And at the very best end of the scale is what's sometimes called meal-based eating with true fasting gaps, meaning 2 or 3 meals a day, spaced 4 to 5 hours apart at minimum, with nothing except plain water in between. This is the pattern that actually gives your sweeper wave the room it needs. Not an extreme or complicated regimen, no 18-hour fasting windows, no skipping meals, no counting anything. Just enough space between eating occasions for that 90-minute to 2-hour cycle to start, run its full course, and genuinely clear your small intestine before the next meal arrives. If you're still watching, and you can already tell exactly which one of these 7 patterns describes you, type the number 4 in the comments right now. I promise you, once you see it laid out like this, it stops feeling abstract and starts feeling obvious. Before we get to cost, I want to mention a few common fixes people reach for that, on their own, don't actually address any of this. Digestive enzyme supplements, taken with meals, can genuinely help some people break down specific foods, like dairy or certain proteins, more completely, but they do nothing to restore the sweeper wave itself, since the sweeper wave only activates between meals, not during digestion. Probiotic supplements can shift the balance of bacterial species in your gut over time, which may help some people, but if you're still grazing every 90 minutes, you're simply feeding a slightly different set of bacteria on the same disrupted schedule, and the fermentation and gas production can continue regardless of which specific strains are present. Peppermint tea and ginger tea are genuinely useful for calming an already bloated stomach in the moment, since both have a real, mild antispasmodic effect on gut muscle, but sipping either one throughout the day, the way many people do, reintroduces the exact grazing pattern we're trying to correct. None of these tools are useless. They're just aimed at a different part of the problem, and none of them replace giving your gut the actual empty, quiet stretch of time it needs to run its cleaning cycle. Now let's talk cost and practicality for a moment, because I know some of you are already thinking about supplements, specific probiotic strains, or expensive gut reset powders that promise to fix motility. Here is the honest truth. There are prescription medications, like low-dose prokinetic agents, that doctors sometimes use specifically to stimulate the migrating motor complex in people with diagnosed motility disorders, and those absolutely have their place for certain medical conditions. But for the vast majority of people dealing with ordinary post-snack bloating, none of that is necessary. This is not a supplement problem. It is a scheduling problem. The most bioavailable, most effective, completely free tool you have for this is simply the clock and the willingness to let your stomach sit empty for a defined stretch of time between meals. Let me tell you about Evelyn. Evelyn is 71, retired from a long career as a school administrator, and for almost 2 years, she quietly assumed something was wrong with her digestion. Every afternoon, without fail, around 3 or 4 o'clock, her stomach would swell so much that she'd have to loosen her waistband. It gurgled loudly enough that she'd get self-conscious sitting near other people. She'd tried cutting out dairy for a month. No real change. She'd tried avoiding beans and cabbage. Slight improvement, but the bloating always came back. She assumed, like a lot of people her age, that this was simply something that happens as you get older, a permanent new normal she'd have to live with. What Evelyn didn't realize was a habit she'd built over years without ever noticing it. She kept a small dish of almonds on her kitchen counter, and every time she walked past it, morning coffee break, right after lunch, mid-afternoon while reading, she'd grab a small handful. Individually, none of these felt like eating. She would have told you, quite honestly, that she ate 3 meals a day like anyone else. But when she actually sat down and counted, she was eating something, however small, roughly every 90 minutes to 2 hours, from 7 in the morning until 9 at night. She had, without any awareness of it, been cancelling her own sweeper wave 12 or 13 times a day, every single day, for years. The change Evelyn made wasn't extreme. She didn't start a strict diet. She didn't cut out any specific food group. She simply moved the almond dish off the counter and into a cupboard, and gave herself 3 defined eating windows a day, with nothing except plain water in between. Within about 10 days, the mid-afternoon bloating had noticeably eased. Within 3 weeks, it had all but disappeared on most days. Here's a simple daily rhythm, based on exactly what worked for her, that you can adapt to your own schedule. It doesn't require any special foods, and it costs nothing. In the morning, have your first meal whenever you'd naturally eat breakfast, but treat it as a genuine meal rather than something to graze through over an hour. Sit down, eat it within 20 to 30 minutes, and then step away from food entirely. If you drink coffee or tea, try to have it either with that meal or plain, without added sugar or milk, in the gap afterward, since plain black coffee or plain tea doesn't meaningfully interrupt the fasting window the way a sweetened or milky version does. In the midday hours, aim to leave a genuine 4 to 5 hour gap before your next meal. If breakfast finishes at 8, lunch around 12:30 or 1 gives your sweeper wave real room to run its course at least once, sometimes twice, before you eat again. During that gap, plain water is completely fine, and in fact helpful, since staying hydrated supports the muscular contractions themselves. In the afternoon, this is usually the hardest stretch for most people, because 3 or 4 o'clock is exactly when the habit of just a little something tends to creep in. This is the window where Evelyn used to reach for her almonds. Instead of a snack, try a short walk, a glass of water, or simply riding out a mild hunger pang for 15 minutes, because very often that early hunger signal passes on its own once you realize it's not true hunger, just habit. In the evening, have dinner at a consistent time, ideally leaving at least 3 hours, and ideally closer to 4, before you go to bed. This protects your longest, most powerful overnight sweeper cycle, the one that does the most thorough cleaning of the entire day, precisely because it runs uninterrupted for 6, 7, sometimes 8 hours while you sleep. None of this requires you to be hungry all day, or to white-knuckle your way through cravings. Most people find that after about a week or two, the urge to snack between meals genuinely fades, simply because the body adjusts to the new rhythm and stops sending those just a little something signals as frequently. What about weekends, family gatherings, or the occasional grandchild's birthday party where food is sitting out all afternoon? Evelyn's approach here was simple, and it's one I'd suggest to you as well. She didn't treat those occasions as failures or reasons to abandon the whole approach. She simply aimed to still eat in defined sittings rather than truly all afternoon, sitting down for a proper plate at the party rather than picking at the snack table for 3 hours straight. One day of looser spacing here and there doesn't undo weeks of a consistent rhythm, the same way one late night of poor sleep doesn't undo months of good sleep habits. The goal isn't perfection every single day. It's making the spaced meal pattern your genuine default, so your gut spends the majority of its time able to complete its cleaning cycle, even if a handful of days a month look a little different. Now I want to be completely honest with you about what this approach can and cannot do, because I'd rather you trust me with the full picture than sell you something that oversells itself. Spacing your meals and letting your sweeper wave run its course will not fix bloating that's caused by an underlying medical condition, things like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, celiac disease, inflammatory bowel disease, gallbladder issues, or a genuine food intolerance. If your bloating is severe, if it's accompanied by unintentional weight loss, blood in your stool, persistent vomiting, or pain that wakes you up at night, none of what I've described here is a substitute for seeing a doctor, and I want to say that plainly rather than gloss over it. This video is about the ordinary, everyday bloating that shows up after small snacks in people who are otherwise healthy, not about diagnosing or replacing medical care for a more serious underlying condition. It's also worth being honest that meal spacing helps most people, but not everyone will feel a full resolution just from timing alone. Some of you may still need to look at specific food sensitivities, stress levels, which also affect gut motility quite directly, or other individual factors layered on top of this. Think of proper meal spacing as fixing the foundation. For most people, that alone solves the majority of the problem. For some, it's a strong first step that then makes it much easier to identify what else, if anything, is still contributing. I also want to flag something important if you're on any regular medication. If you take medication that's meant to be taken with food, don't skip that instruction in the name of extending a fasting window, follow what your doctor or pharmacist has told you. And if you have diabetes, particularly if you take insulin or a medication that can cause low blood sugar, changing your eating frequency is something you should only do after talking to your doctor first, since meal timing directly affects blood sugar management for people in that situation. This isn't a small disclaimer I'm adding to cover myself, genuinely. If you're managing a chronic condition with medication, loop in your doctor before changing your eating pattern, even a change as simple as this one. I also want to be clear about one more limit. If you try spacing your meals properly, giving it a genuine 3 or 4 weeks, and your bloating hasn't improved at all, that itself is useful information, not a personal failure. It suggests something beyond simple grazing-related motility disruption may be involved, and that's a reasonable point to bring your specific symptoms to a doctor, ideally describing exactly what you've already tried, since that history genuinely helps a doctor narrow down what else might be going on far faster than starting from scratch. Before you go, I want to leave you with one more piece of this puzzle, because even if you do everything I've just described, space your meals perfectly, cut the constant sipping, protect that overnight window, there is one other factor that can quietly undo all of it, and almost nobody connects it to bloating at all. It has nothing to do with what you eat, or even when you eat. It has to do with a small, overlooked muscle that most people have never once thought about in the context of their digestion, and when it isn't working properly, it can trap gas in your gut no matter how well-timed your meals are. I'm going to walk you through exactly what that muscle is, how it quietly sabotages even a perfectly spaced eating schedule, and the simple, specific way to check whether it's playing a role in your own bloating in the next video. So if this helped make sense of what's actually happening in your gut, go ahead and subscribe, and tap that bell so you don't miss it, because this next piece genuinely completes the picture we've started here today.